Hey, everybody. Larsen Jensen here. Thanks for joining in. Matt, awesome to see you, brother. How are you?
Larson, great to see you, man. You were just here for
I
for
know.
those for those.
This is twice. This is twice in a week.
I
Got to
know
have lunch with you this week, and now get to chat with you a little bit more. And
it is.
obviously,
It is.
a lot of great things going on with Merlin.
Yeah, but it's also distinctly colder here in Boston than it is in San Diego.
I know. I left my jacket at the airport. I don't even need one here.
Got it.
It's good to see you, man. Well, listen, I wanted to, hop on here and share more about your background and path to entrepreneurship, but most importantly, the great work that you're doing over at Merlin. So maybe, for the audience here, would you mind sharing a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and what is Merlin?
Yeah, Merlin is, I think, one of the coolest companies out there, but I'm clearly a biased party. The best way to think about what we're doing is building a pilot, just not a human one. So taking everything that's happening in a pilot's brain, putting that in software, and then putting that software into a wide variety of aircraft to enable those aircraft to fly either with reduced crew, so two crew down to one, with one human crew plus the Merlin pilot, or totally uncrewed in the future. So how do we define sort of what the next 100 years of aviation starts to look like? With the past 100 years of aviation being human pilot plus airplane, next 100 years of aviation are airplane plus autonomy. And we're super excited to be able to go write that first chapter, start getting after it. I got the notification from our HR software the other day that I just hit my 6th anniversary at Merlin.
Oh,
So it's been
congrats.
like both a long 6 years and a very short 6 years. But it's been an awesome journey, and you and Harpoon have been there, from close to day one. Um, we're coming up on 200 employees, backed by awesome investors like Harpoon, but also some later stage investors like Google Ventures, Bailey Gifford, Snowpoint, a few others. And then first round Floodgate, really great team. Primarily based in Boston, which is where I'm joining from now. A big group in Denver, big group in Los Angeles, and then we have a wholly owned subsidiary in New Zealand. So it's
Holy
uh,
cow.
it's 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 a wild operation here.
I love that overview, Matt. Really appreciate it. And you remember meeting you for the first time still years ago in San Francisco and just being in awe of you and your vision and what you're building. And it was sort of one of those obvious moments for me, which is the things that we tend to look for. It's like, what is the future of flight? What's the future of the aerospace industry? And it's semi-pilotless to start, and over time pilotless in many ways. And so I'm curious to hear what gave you the idea to do this and the confidence to go out and do it in the first place. Like, what were you thinking, and what did you see in the industry, and what made you want to start this business?
Yeah, if we had known how hard it is,
That's what they always say, right? Yeah,
probably
exactly.
it's now much easier now that we're so much larger. But the perfect entrepreneurial mix of naivete and delusions of grandeur. So we started the company with a high degree of skepticism around autonomous driving, actually, and sort of autonomous cars, saying, autonomous cars and autonomous driving is a really, really, really hard problem. Um, but autonomy writ large is taking over the world. So the original concept behind Merlin was, where can we apply autonomy in a way that has a meaningful impact on people's lives, has a meaningful impact on safety, and also is able to actually scale into a real business without spending billions of dollars. I learned to fly in college, in a little tail dragger on a grass strip in Vermont. But really introduced to aviation by my dad. I interview every employee who comes to Merlin, and I would say 70% of folks got first exposed to aviation through air shows, right, with their parents.
Yeah.
So my dad's love of aviation, led him to bring me to air show, and uh, uh, at least gave me enough context to be able to go think about the problem. I think in a good way of being a pilot, understanding the challenges, but also the opportunities. And yeah, we started off on that journey, which I'm happy to talk about, sort of the specifics of how we got here. But putting one foot in front of the other, of just saying, hey, look, the future of flight is autonomous, and how can we make some baby steps to be able to go get there in the short term.
I love that. And something I promised my fellow SEAL buddies I'd never say openly is how much I'm a fanboy of the pilots and the flyboys. But I am. I mean,
It's
I
on
just
the
got back
record.
from. Yeah, I just got back a couple of weeks ago from the Miramar Air Show, and we had Fleet
Oh
Week in
wow.
San Francisco last week.
Yeah.
In both places, got to see the Blue Angels flying around. I'm lucky that I had some friends that are former Blues, and it's just one of the most amazing things. And it's just that precision just is mind boggling to me. And I have to say, I felt the same way in many ways when I went out to Mojave to your the Air and Spaceport out there, where I had the opportunity to see the work that you were doing with so many of these test pilots who had flown any of these numerable platforms. Would you mind talking a little bit about that, sort of like the quality of the test pilots that you have that are helping you to train your algorithms and models and ultimately get the Merlin pilot certified?
Yeah. I mean, unlike a lot of other software enabled hardware, startups, if we get something wrong, like it's really bad. Like we're
Yeah.
working with a flying piece of metal that's going, 300 miles an hour in some cases. And there's no pull over to the side of the road and go figure out what's wrong. So in order to be able to go move quickly, we've had to test in a way where we can incrementally take on risk in a way that you know is responsible, but also allows us to be able to go innovate in sort of the speed that we want to be able to go innovate. So from the very early days, we engaged with the test community, out in Mojave, which is right next to Edwards Air Force Base, which is sort of the home of U.S. Air Force test, at least experimental test. And worked and continue to work with some of the best pilots in the world to be able to go take sort of an objectively crazy system. So like, to put this in perspective, Larsen, like, and this, but we had a sort of a Canard composite aircraft, like it's
Yeah.
like a $60,000 airplane that was literally sitting in the corner of a hangar somewhere. We put a BeagleBone Blue, which is a $60 computer. You can go down to like Micro Center or Amazon and just go buy. We put some like fairly open source code on that, shoved that in an airplane, connected it to some like off the shelf autopilot servos, put some like, bolts down and then put an AutoZone heat cover over it because it kept overheating. And then we flew it, right? Like that was how we started. So in order to be able to go take on like a big risk like that, you've got to be able to go design your test plan and your safety plan in a way where we're saying, all right, crazy risk, but how can we put edges around that risk and be able to go build it up quickly? Because either you do it unsafely, which is never acceptable, or you get so paralyzed by the unknown that you never test anything, which is also not great. So, our iterative process of sort of crawl, walk, run has been super important to us. And the test pilot core and sort of our test team is just a tremendous part of that. The last thing I'll say about this is it's the test pilots get all the glory and they deserve it. They should get all the glory. But the vast majority of test happens behind the scenes, right? It's the flight test engineers, sort of the software engineers. And, we built the company during COVID. So we had to learn how to do remote flight tests. So we were the first company in the world that was doing, truly like remote autonomous flight test where, not because we went out to go build it, just because we had to. So it really was a team effort, both on the test pilot side, but also behind the scenes with everyone who's working really, really hard.
That's really inspirational to me, and it's been really a privilege to be a footnote in this whole journey of yours. Um, Talk to me a little bit more about the progress. I mean, that's a fascinating, and I love how you started. Like this is taking this startup style advice of shipping a minimal viable product, experimenting, failing fast, but failing safely. In your case, to get those reps in and sort of like compound those learnings from there. I think you've done sort of everything right in that regard, as far as I can tell. Where did you start? Like what platforms and like where are you at now? You've really gone, I don't know, I guess upstream or downstream, however you want to describe it, into a variety of different platforms. And what's the future look like thereafter?
So when we raised, the company was founded by me, and I always sort of joke, but not really, by me and like Josh Koppelman at First Round Capital, who invested alongside you, but at the end of the day, like was sort of that first big check who led the seed. It was like an idea. Company didn't have a name. It was like me and like like a little computer on this bench in Artisans Asylum in Somerville. Like it was like objectively like not an investable thing, right? Like way back early on. But like Josh is like secretly one of the true co-founders of the company, and took a bet on saying, "Hey, can we iterate quickly?" And story for another day, but I bet Josh my right kidney, specifically my right kidney, that we would be able to go get to $5 million of revenue and a flying aircraft off of our Series Seed. So we did that. I no longer own Josh. No longer owe Josh Koppelman a kidney.
Thank goodness.
I
Yeah,
know
I guess
it was only my right one.
aligned
Yeah,
incentives, right?
line of incentives.
So some positive,
You know,
some positive and negative reinforcement, I guess, there on the line.
Totally. So, on the Seed, we got our first airplane flying, up, flying, landing, taking off, touching down, and through a lot of work you were really instrumental in, and Harpoon was really instrumental in. We got introduced to some of our first customers at the U.S. Air Force, who were just starting that journey of saying, hey, on the sort of in the global war on terrorism, we relied on remotely piloted aircraft because we had air superiority, right? Like
Yep.
we controlled the airspace largely over Iraq and Afghanistan. We could put whatever we wanted up in the air. And just at that period of time was when the US Air Force was starting to think about some other emerging threats around the world, particularly some of the great power competition, particularly with
Yep.
China, around saying, well, we've got to rethink how we project air power in the 21st and 22nd century. So off of that progress, we then raised a Series A from Google Ventures, and the bet from that round of financing was, can we take what we were doing, translate it into a $15+ million program at the Air Force, and then translate our technology from this like tiny little janky plane, which we love, by the way. It's like, so don't take that as any knock on our Canary composite. Uh, and translated up into a very large aircraft. So specifically close to a 20,000-pound aircraft. So we translated the Merlin Pilot to the Cessna Caravan, the King Air, and then eventually all the way up to the Twin Otter, which unlocked a huge sort of $15+ million contract with sort of the U.S. Air Force around how can we go take our technology and eventually adapt it to large aircraft. Off of that progress, we raised $105 million Series B. And that's when folks like Bailey Gifford and Snowpoint and some others got involved. And the bet that we made at the Series B was, can we go take what we were doing, translate that into a production program with the U.S. Air Force? So we, becoming one of the 2 or 3 companies, venture-backed companies that have transitioned into production. And can we sign at least $100 million worth of order book while also translating it into a very large aircraft? And we've hit all those things. So we announced a couple months ago that we were awarded a $100+ million production contract with the U.S. Air Force to bring the Merlin Pilot, the C-130J, and we're now expanding that to a wide variety of other platforms and flying. So it's been a journey, but it's been a sort of a journey of like trying to call our shot and be able to go take sort of that step into the unknown, and then when you take that one step, sort of the next step becomes really, really clear. So it's just been sort of that forward progress.
How do you establish those milestones? It's very rigorous, and you've actually, as an investor, I sort of know you've hit every one that you've set out to go do. And these are ambitious; these are difficult to do. In some of our software companies, it's a little bit, different. It's like scaling
Sure.
up AAR. Hey, this is how we got to fill up our customer pipeline. We're going to win this many. This is how many we're going to land. This is our pricing. Here's how we're going to expand. We can't have any churn. So it's sort of like I don't want to say easier. It's definitely very, very hard. But what you're doing is definitively sort of like, interfacing with the physical world in a real way. How do you sort of like establish those milestones historically? And what are the next ones over the coming years? What's your sort of like next shot you're going to be calling, if you don't mind sharing with the group?
Yeah. So it's all about getting capability flying and not talking about capability and not, putting out PowerPoints and renders and sort of other things and actually out getting it flying. So, what our team is solely focused on right now is bringing the core Merlin Pilot into large, high assurance aircraft. So that means doing some civil certification work that we're doing in the US and New Zealand. And off of that Common Core civil certified
Yep.
base, we're translating that into the C-130J and the KC-135. what that will allow us to do is allow us to be able to go get tens of thousands, eventually hundreds of thousands of hours of time under wing with a Merlin pilot sitting next to a human, where we can start to be able to go build trust, confidence, and reps and sets underneath that Merlin pilot, so that when it does need to go fly on its own or without a human aboard, or we do need to be able to go take it to other aircraft, it's not just a highly capable system, but it's a system that we trust. So once again, it's not, hey, look, we're going to go fly inverted and perform civil affairs duties while also flying inverted, right? Like that's the shiny, sexy stuff, but it's also kind of bullshit, right? Like the hard work that needs to get done is the basic aviate, navigate, communicate, build that foundation, and everything else takes care of itself from there.
I love that. And one of the formative thesis that we underwrote and that we continue to believe in to this day is that we already have a large set of existing infrastructure, in this case, airplanes, that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to recreate a whole new physical airframe in order to modernize, the aerospace industry. We can take that existing infrastructure, be capital efficient, add your autonomy systems to a whole variety of aircrafts and airframes and do that over time. And sort of like that's sort of the pie in the sky opportunity, is to retrofit, for lack of a better term, my words, a lot of these aircraft. And it's not just the DoD, it's not just the Air Force, it's not just the air wings of all of our different service branches. It's long-term commercial air fleets as well, which are extremely, which is perhaps even a larger opportunity. But you intentionally started with the government market, but you still have aspirations to transcend that into the commercial aviation world as well, which is, I think, is why you're partnering so much with the New Zealand FAA that has that bilateral agreement with our FAA as well. Would you mind talking a little bit about sort of like why you started with government, why you're ultimately expecting to transcend that into civil aviation as well, and what that opportunity set looks like?
At the end of the day, we're building a pilot, right? So just like there are, not millions, tens of thousands of pilots out there flying today who started their career in the military and then
Yeah.
transitioned out in the civil world and are flying year round on American Airlines or Delta, or flying your packages to you and your family with FedEx or UPS or DHL. We fundamentally are focused on building that core pilot. And just like some pilots start their career, not to torture the analogy, but not just
Yeah.
like some pilots start their career in the military and then transition in the civil world.
Yeah.
Same with what we're doing. So, we are very much a DoD first company, but building a DoD agnostic product.
Yep.
So our core product is not particular to the DoD. There's certain modifications of the product that we make to make it applicable to the DoD. But flying a plane is sort of like flying a plane, right? There are clearly specialized missions, procedures, other things that military pilots use to be able to go execute on their missions. But at the end of the day, being able to go aviate, navigate, communicate, fly the airplane is shockingly similar between the military world and the civilian world. So we very much focused on building that common core and then adapting that common core to particular customers, sort of missions. Nothing to announce quite yet, but you'll see some news from us, soon about starting to be able to go transition that core Merlin pilot into the civil world on some very large freighter sort of aircraft. But by using that platform approach, we can remain nimble as a software company, um, and then work with like our amazing subcontractors, vendors, others, folks like Sierra Nevada Corporation and others, to be able to go adapt what we're doing to sort of a wide variety of aircraft. So that way, when you fast forward 10, 20, 30 years from now, um, being able to go provide truly the autonomy system of record for things that fly is like, that's an important company. Like that's a generational company that changes the way humans use the sky, right? And the way to be able to go get there is exactly what we're doing, which is putting a pilot out there, starting to get sets and reps with folks like the DoD, expanding the capabilities, expanding the number of supported aircraft, until it starts to become really, really, really easy to add on new aircraft and new missions.
That's a great overarching story arc there, and I really appreciate that. One of the things that helps me remember is, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you're really taking a certification, sort of like first style mentality to building this business and to building the Merlin pilot, which I think is one of the differentiators that you have versus maybe other people in the space that are taking a different type of approach. That other folks maybe started with smaller platforms like drones, things of that nature that are group 1, group 2, group 3 UAS. you sort of went straight to the manned aircraft, which obviously have a whole nother set of certification requirements versus the things that are too small to fit a person, right? They're never going to fit a person in these things. What's that like? And just, talk me through that a little bit in terms of starting with a certification first mentality, and what are the differences and like what's going on from a regulatory framework, not only inside of the DoD, internationally, FAA. How do you stitch all this together in your business?
Yeah, ultimately the regulation exists to ensure that we're putting safe objects up into the sky. So whether it's military airworthiness, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, EASA in Europe, the CAA in New Zealand, they're all after the same goal, which is providing highly reliant and highly safe aircraft that are in our national airspace. So for us, our focus on taking a certification first approach, certification is sort of the output of that. The real crux of our business is taking sort of a high assurance approach, right, to being able to go build the core, aviate, navigate, communicate core of what we're building. And that high assurance approach is the prerequisite to be able to go certify, and is the prerequisite to be able to go to the military and get military airworthiness, sort of on the platform. But it's like dramatically harder. So if you were out there doing like just sort of like a robotics implementation like we did in our first 6 months, right? Like that's enough for a proof of concept, but it's never going to be able to go take you into the wide variety of platforms that we're sort of working on today. So there's a question in the chat about sort of how we're thinking about us versus some of the other folks in the space, and we work closely with some of those folks like Shield and Andrel and sort of a few others, either directly or indirectly, to start to think about how we can go take that high assurance core, right, which is what we're building, and then be able to go add some of the skills and capabilities that folks like Andrel are building on top of that. So there's things that Andrel is doing to build mission autonomy and some tactical autonomy skills that are super important. And when married with a high assurance framework and a high assurance operating system, those apps, if you will, on that high assurance operating system become even more powerful. Certainly there are places where we will develop some of those apps ourselves, but at the end of the day, being able to go create an ecosystem on top of the assured Merlin pilot is really where we're focused.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. What's been the funnest part of building this business so far? I mean, what's been the most exciting for you?
I think there's a lot of startups out there who I generally am of the belief that all startups are sort of equally painful, just in like different ways. Like whether it's Larsen, like whether it's running a venture capital firm, which is
Totally.
like a
Yeah.
startup, right?
I
Or
started this. I look
yeah,
back, like you said, your comments resonate. Not really sure
yeah,
I'd do it
right.
if I knew how hard it was, but we're
It's
getting through it. You're
equal.
doing a good job.
It's equally painful, right?
Yeah.
Like regardless of what you're doing. So at least do something that matters.
Yeah.
Like at least do something that matters. I certainly don't judge anyone who's working on something different. Like people are doing really awesome stuff. But ultimately, the United States was built around this concept of solving like these really hard, big problems. And I think like we as an innovation ecosystem and as a country, like we've got to think hard about that, of saying we have like a limited amount of capital, we have a limited amount of intellectual bandwidth. And like where are we spending that? Are we
Yep.
spending it getting somebody to click an ad 3 more times than they would have already clicked it? Or are we spending it doing something like, selfishly being able to redefine how we put objects up into the sky and how we project air power? So I think sort of what's been most fun about what we've been working on is that it's hard, it sucks, right? Like, but that hardness is in service of a really big mission. And if we get it right, and we're getting it right, it has a huge impact on how the world uses the sky, and also a huge impact on how the United States is able to go project air power. So what's fun is being able to go work on a big mission with some really awesome people.
I love that. Last question I have before we wrap it up, and I guess last call for questions. This is sort of your cue if anybody has any further ones. Is there a future where everything is unmanned? If our and we project forward, choose your time frame.
Yeah.
10, 20, 50 years. Is this are we in a future where I'm going to go get on an airplane at the airport and it conceivably could be piloted by the Merlin pilot? Is that in the realm of the possible in our
Oh
lifetime?
yeah, I mean it'll definitely happen. I think it's not a 10-year thing though,
Yeah.
especially for passengers, right? Like I think that there is a DoD cargo passenger progression sort of all this, where it'll eventually become a sort of environment here where autonomy takes more and more sort of control of sort of the aircraft and does so in like a really safe way. Like humans are still the leading cause of aviation accidents.
Yeah.
So if we're able to go, and I say as a pilot who like loves to fly airplanes, right? So like
Yep.
I get it.
A
But
machine
but
doesn't
all
get fatigued. A machine, a machine doesn't need to
totally,
get crew
you
rest
know,
and things of
and
that
like we
nature.
just we just kill so many people unnecessarily in this country around like pilot error and sort of other things. So I think that there's like real room for as we start to think about like what is aviation? At the end of the day, aviation is to be able to go serve people and to be able to go serve people on the ground, be able to go serve a mission.
Yep.
And how we do that, like, has always evolved. We started out with, at the end of World War II, with 5 people on an airplane: a pilot, co-pilot, engineer, navigator, and radio operator. And as the technology's improved, we've given more and more control over the technology, and aviation has gotten safer and safer. So, pilots are not going away. Like there's going to be sort of a long period here where pilots are working very, very closely with autonomy. And maybe in some future state, are you able to go get on an airplane that doesn't have any pilots aboard? Maybe they'll probably just be on the ground. But with that said, it's a long journey. We're just putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, I love that. I got a question here that's, I guess, more broad, not company specific to Merlin, but about what does the funding process look like for VCs that invest in concepts only, and what do VCs typically want to see in a company or person before they invest? I have my perspective as one side of the table, and Matt, you've lived it. This is your second startup, so you sort of probably know better than I do from a founder standpoint. But I think there's some subset of venture capitalists that are broken apart by stage. The earliest folks, the seed and pre-seed folks, will definitionally need to take, hey, we're investing in purely a person because that person is so special. In my opinion, it's person plus an idea is sort of the right thing you need to have. It's a person with some domain expertise and has this, audacious vision that if it works out well, it could get really large. But, other stages as you go down the capital stack, series A, B, C, so on and so forth, look for different forms of metrics based on the type of business that it is. But, my bias is to find people like Matt with these audacious visions and they have a chance of pulling it off and transforming an entire industry. And at some point, you have to take that leap of faith. It's a very non-traditional investment asset class, I guess you could say, where you're believing that something can be built before it's demonstrated at all. But Matt, maybe I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think especially anybody who's focused on just sort of like at the concept stage, which is what a lot of deep tech is, right? Like you can't go out there and like, throw together a website or an app, right? Like it's it's being able to go draw sort of a clear line to here's the idea and here's the first inflection point to meaningfully de-risk that idea. So for us, it was flying airplane plus $5 million of DoD contract, right? So like those are the de-risk points. So if when we went to venture capitalists, Larsen, you included, and said, hey, look, you know, we need X millions of dollars. I think it was like $3 million, right? To be able to go from dead stop to flying airplane and $5 million of DoD contract. I think everybody can sort of sit around the table and go, yeah, like if they do that, like that is a valuable thing, and they'll be able to go, sort of go to the next step, and then go take that sort of first step and be able to go sort of degrade it down into like actionable steps in sort of,
Yep.
30, 60, 90-day chunks. It's like staring at the top of the mountain from the base of the mountain and being like, I don't know how we're going to get up there, but I know we've got to go up, and I have a plan on how to get to Camp One. And we will be safe and secure at Camp One, and we can look further up the mountain and be able to go figure out where Camp Two is. Right.
Yeah.
I see a lot of entrepreneurs who just go, hey, big mountain, right? We should go climb it without like clearly identifying the Camp One and like a rough cut of the plan to get to Camp One.
Yep. I love that. Well, Matt, thank you so much for hopping on here and sharing your wisdom and experience with us. And I really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Again, for our listeners that are tuning in live, my name is Larsen Jensen, joined by Matt George here. Thank you so much for the time, and we'll see you all soon.
All right. See ya. Thank you.